So I was gonna introduce myself as the new and improved John Inman, the younger, although this is being recorded, so John will get me back. Let me tell you a little bit about my history, which kind of sets up how I got into teaching governance and building some of our programs here in the Milgard School. So my background was in philanthropy. I'm a recovering fundraiser, and so I'm in a 12-step program for that. I'm at the point where I apologize to everyone now. I'm sorry. Exactly. Yep. So I started that career. I did some other stuff. I worked in the sporting industry for a few years. But I started at Marybridge Children's Hospital. I created a bicycle tour called the Courage Classic. Yeah. So it's been going on there's only 3 hills in it. Snoqualmie Pass, Blewett Pass, and Stevens Pass. It's the only ride with 3 hills. So I created that and built that for, I think it's first 5 or 6 years, and then became as the executive director of the Marybridge Children's Foundation I was there for 15, so. And then came back here and got my MBA and focused my MBA on corporate social responsibility. And in the interim between there, I went to Tacoma Goodwill and built a corporate partnerships division for them. And when I graduated with my MBA, the dean asked me to come create the Center for Leadership and Social Responsibility here at the Milgard School. So I've been doing that for the last 9.5 years. But all of that is based on kind of this model of relationships. You know, fundraising is a relationship business, and I think entrepreneurship is equally a relationship business. So at the Milgard School, when I got here, if any of you know Dr. Purdy, she was one of the founding members of the Milgard School, and she and I were walking up the steps out here one day, and I said, geez, I finally am on the other side of the fence, and I can get younger people engaged in board service in the community. Because I was the director of the Marybridge Foundation Board, and I always wanted to engage younger people on the board and could never figure out a systematic way to do that. And I said, okay, I'm on the other side of the fence. I can push and get students engaged. And her first comment to me was, if you don't do it for credit, they won't do it. So I said, well, let's do it for credit. Let's find someone else who's doing a course like that, and let's create something here. So I went and looked. I thought it was going to be an easy search, and it took me actually a couple weeks. And I looked at basically every school in the world to find something on governance that engaged students in a way that got them experience on boards in the community. And I was able to find a couple of internship programs that placed students on boards in the community, but not what we were thinking, which is, it's called board governance. It's taught over 2 quarters. The first quarter, students are on a board, observing a board in the community, and then the second quarter we talk about governance and governance principles and what does it mean to be a board member, how do good boards operate. And so the students engage with that board from January through June. It's an award-winning course. We've gotten recognition from the UN. The UN Global Compact has a group called Principles for Responsible Management Education, and it was recognized as one of the global best practices.
These are nonprofit boards,
or? They are nonprofit boards, yeah. So we've worked over the years, I've worked with I think 97 organizations in the community.
Yeah, you into Philanthropy Northwest and people like that.
I know Philanthropy Northwest. I've never worked with them in terms of putting someone on that board.
The Chamber of Commerce does an education on boards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's my background in terms of kind of boards and board service. I also have some experience with a small business that I'll talk about in a little bit, in terms of helping a small business from a board perspective. So John's question that he was going to ask is, what is the best way to find the right people for your board of directors? So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. Here's some other questions that I wrote down that I think are equally relevant, which is, why do you need a board? What skills and expertise are you looking for? I want to talk a little bit about the importance of networking. Clarity on roles and what you need from a board member. I think it's important for all boards of any size. The power of diversity on a board, and I wrote down, you're buying time from people, from board members you're asking to participate, and essentially you're purchasing their time, and what's that time worth to you? I think it's a good question to ask yourself. So I'd start with, why do you need a board? As a small business, as an entrepreneurial startup, why do you need a board? I'll give you my opinion on that, and I welcome others, because I think they're probably all correct responses. I think the biggest reason small businesses in particular need a board, and board, that term is very broadly used and can mean many different things. But I think the main reason is connections. What you're looking for is connections in the community, and how those connections can be leveraged. On a nonprofit board, those connections are typically around fundraising, although not always. Sometimes they're around how that organization can partner in the community. In the nonprofit sector, the sector always likes to talk a lot about partnership. It doesn't do it really well because funders don't encourage it. They encourage it, but they don't fund it. So we talk a lot about partnership, but we don't do it well. In the corporate social responsibility space, I hear there's a term that I hear kicked around a lot, and it's co-opetition. So it's figuring out who your competition is and how to cooperate with them to move the needle forward for everyone. It's the whole rising tides idea, and it's a valuable tool that companies can use. And I think it's equally important for small businesses, is when you're thinking about who can help you, looking at the market, looking at all stakeholders in your business, and competitors are a stakeholder, and figuring out how you can engage them. It may not be bringing them into your inner sanctum, but there's probably some way that you can engage competitors. But back to, why do you need a board? An opinion is you need people to help connect you. You need other opinions and ideas. One of the activities that we do through our centers, we do a case competition with students. And I always tell students that, because students always want to put together teams of other students that they know. And I always tell them, the one thing I can guarantee you is, if you put together a team of all your friends, you're going to lose. Because you aren't bringing to the table opinions that are counter to yours. And as friends, you guys have figured out all of the dynamics of how you work together, and those dynamics pre-exist. Build a team that brings together people that bring different perspectives, different ideas, aren't afraid to put them forward, aren't afraid to push them, and you're gonna do better. And I think that kind of analogy carries forward in terms of small business. Putting together a group of people, whatever it is, whether it's a board or advisory council or whatever you want to call it, that brings different backgrounds, different perspectives, people who challenge the status quo, that is why you need a board. You need people to challenge you.
But don't you think, Joe, sometimes when you bring down people who challenge the status quo, sometimes they can be toxic?
Sure. Absolutely.
It's like, man, they're smart.
And get rid of those.
It has to be a cooperation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the idea, is cooperative, but I totally see what you're saying when you bring friends in, because you've worked out those dynamics. So people are going to say, yeah, you do that.
Yeah. It's an issue of, I always, when I work, I do some consulting with nonprofit boards mostly as well, and one of the things I do is I go back and look at meeting minutes, and if I see that there's never been a no vote, that is a bad culture.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
That is a very negative culture when everyone always agrees. You put however many people, 10, 20 people in a room, smart people theoretically in a room, and if they all agree, half of them are lying. And they're just going along. And they're not bringing forward their objections or, wait a minute, I've got this question, I've got this idea. And I see that is a common, it does. And it's not effective. Now, equally ineffective is the board member who's a jerk about it and is destructive and disrupts meetings. I mean, that hinders growth as well. You need someone who can responsibly and reasonably bring up an objection. Hey, I've got a question on that. I really want to kind of push this a little bit, as opposed to being a jerk about it. I've seen both.
So I'm going to ask you some more questions about this because, as you know, this is very pertinent to what I do. But
Yeah.
sometimes when you invite a friend on there, your roles change, right? It's kind of like so friends can not be friends after a while too.
Right.
And I've seen smaller startups completely implode just because a friend turned out to be
Yeah.
a dork once they got into power or something like that.
Yeah, even worse is a family member. Because you can't escape them. But yeah, I've seen the same thing, where the relationship changes and then it gets tough. It becomes toxic, and then if there's an environment that doesn't encourage kind of productive disagreement, and I think that's what you're really shooting for.
It makes them feel open and comfortable with them.
Yeah.
To help them with that idea and promoting it, but not that you're like,
Yeah.
they have sure another good idea.
What you're shooting for is a culture. In cultures, that is the hardest thing to both create and shift. It's actually easier to create, harder to shift. Once the concrete has set, it is an extremely difficult thing to shift culture. And what you're looking for is a productive culture that engages people in disagreement in a responsible way. And that's leadership.
One of the things that I'm curious about, one of the things that I heard about good boards is that they actually work on learning about board governance as a skill.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, when people are especially if you have like high value people, their time is very limited, valuable, it's hard to schedule board meetings. How do you, do you cut 15 minutes out of every meeting, or what do you do to say, okay guys, so we're all human, we're not perfect, but you don't necessarily know about board governance and you haven't experienced it. This is something you need to learn about. But they might not see the value in it, or there's all these complications. How do you get people on board to learn about it?
My opinion is that that's not a governance problem.
Okay.
That's a communications problem.
Okay.
Because the real question you're asking is, I have information that we want to convey to a group of people and have them understand it.
Yeah.
That's a communications challenge. So I think if you approach it through that lens of what are strategies and tactics to communicate that. Some that I've seen that, and again, it depends on the culture of the organization, because a tactic in one organization that works really well may fail miserably in another. But some that I've seen, put board trainings into bite-sized chunks and send them out before the meeting. In the old days, it used to be our board packet. Now everything's electronic. But in your board packet, have a couple of paragraphs on what is good practice for board governance committee. What's the board's responsibility in terms of making connections in the community? What are good ways to do that? Put those in that, and then that way people are spending their time productively, and maybe put 5 minutes on the meeting agenda to discuss it and talk about it. I've seen that work actually really well with one organization that had a whole series of kind of trainings. There's a resource for that, it's called Board Source, that has a lot of kind of bite-sized trainings and books and information on governance, different topics on governance. That if you do that, send it out ahead of time, ask people to read it, tell them we're going to have a conversation about this at the meeting, then people can think about it ahead of time and say, hey, I was thinking about this, and come productively prepared, rather than sitting down and then doing a 15-minute chunk of time in a 1-hour meeting for board training. So
I see it as education.
yes.
And when I was with the USO, we would have a annual gathering somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that would be education and training on board management. Because frequently someone joins a board and they don't know anything about, so I'm not to pick on you, Dane, but if I said you want to be on the board, and you should be asking some questions, like what's the insurance coverage? Because you're at risk if you join the board. I was on the chamber, and I didn't know it, but someone was looking it up the other day. I was named in the lawsuit they had against the chamber.
Yeah.
I never had to go to a trial or deposition, but I was named as a board member.
Mm-hmm.
The chamber here brings in a guy who looks at all 400 and some odd chambers in the western United States and does a presentation. It's pretty much half a day. And his end result was, if it works there, that's great. It's not a cookie cutter, but it should all look like that. Sure. So different things. But right now, after this, I'm going to a meeting where I'm the president of the board, Pierce Military Business Alliance, and we're reviewing bylaws. And like you're talking about, I mean, that was really making sausage, But the people have, brought up all these good points. And our email traffic here was from the people who brought up all the stuff, and we're going to approve the bylaws. He said, if anyone objects, after all this work, I'm leaving, I'm not doing this again.
Yeah, nice.
So, but it's in the bylaws, like Joe was saying. What does the president do? What does the vice president do? What does the second vice president do? Which in our bylaws is to go out and look at membership. Mm-hmm. And so those should be in there.
Yeah.
But also the board is.
People understand interesting about the person getting, somebody couldn't be on the board because they were involved in something else that precluded them from being on in that situation.
That's a conflict of interest that comes up a lot, and the common misperception about conflicts of interest is that it precludes you from participating. Actually, my opinion is if you go through, you should have an annual practice of disclosing conflicts of interest. There's a practice around that. If you have no conflicts of interest on your board, you probably have the wrong board.
We're all conflicted.
Right? Everyone is conflicted. But you should have, if your board really, especially if you're looking for a board to connect you in different ways in the community, if they don't have connections that conflict somehow, you might have the wrong board.
So so the board, the couple boards that I have, they're not like board of directors, they're board of advisors.
Right.
Okay, so there is a difference between that because I don't have bylaws for them,
Yeah.
but I have responsibilities that they, that I'm requiring of them.
Yes.
Should board of advisors have bylaws?
A board of directors, the formal legal structure of a board of directors of an organization is basically, those are the representatives of the owners.
Yeah.
In a for-profit company, they're representing shareholders, or however your structure is. In a not-for-profit organization, they're representing the owners, which are the community. So they're representing the interests of the owners. An advisory board, and the board of directors has a fiduciary responsibility.
Right.
The two questions I always ask is, let me see your paid up D&O insurance. directors and officers insurance, and I want to see your most recent books on payroll taxes. Because D&O insurance and payroll taxes are the two personal liability areas that you can personally be held accountable for. The IRS will go back against, even in a nonprofit organization, will go back against the board of directors for unpaid payroll taxes, personally. And it's always the deepest pocket theory. But advisory boards are just that. They exist to advise. And that's where it gets down to that clarity on roles and what you need, especially with advisory boards. I just put together an advisory, I don't even call it a board, an advisory council for our Center for Leadership and Social Responsibility. It's got 22 members on it. They represent mostly large corporations in this area, and they're the sustainability officer or corporate social responsibility or corporate citizenship vice president or whatever it is. And I was extremely clear with those people when they joined that board, what it was for, what I was asking of them. And in our first meeting, where we sat down and talked about it, I said my pet peeve around advisory boards is a lot of people form them and then don't ask advice. The board meetings are always about, I'm going to tell you all of this stuff. It's not, here's this thing, what is your opinion? And collect advice. I see a lot of advisory boards make that mistake. So I actually developed an agenda format that each agenda item it has a key, and it's exactly what I want from them on that item. I want their advice, I want their support, I want, what am I asking from them for that agenda item? Because it forces the meeting builder to think through that lens. I actually did it for myself to make sure that everything that was an agenda item on that list was something that I wanted advice or their opinion or their support, and it works well. But you're right, it's from a formal structure standpoint, one has a fiduciary responsibility for the organization. The other can take a whole bunch of different structures.
Just to follow your disagreement plan, considering we're a board here.
Good.
So you have something in your mind, and Tom, you have something in your mind for your advisory group. But there's no continuity if that's not written down. So if someone couldn't follow your footsteps, or they hear something, but they didn't see what was written down.
Right.
So I would recommend that.
Yep.
Because you said you have something clear that you want them to do.
Right.
It's in here.
Right.
But it's not, go to your communication.
Right.
How do you communicate that?
Right.
So I don't know that if I would do it as bylaws or how formal, and that's not my forte, doing bylaws and stuff, but.
Yeah.
Mine either.
If you had a position, because you named off some positions you have on your board, social responsibility person, this person.
Yeah.
What should they be doing?
Right.
Because the thing that you didn't get back to in your questions there is, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of the board? How do you rate your board?
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
And so if you rate your advisory group, or metrics, and it doesn't have to be hard and fast, but are they doing what you want?
Sure.
And I'm always a fan of keep that, bylaws are a necessary evil.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yes, and most people use bylaws wrong. My observation is when I go into a board and observe what they're doing, and people are bringing up bylaws and talking about the bylaws, I always look at it this way. Bylaws are a toolbox that has a whole bunch of tools in it. The people who are complaining the most about bylaws usually want to use the toolbox as a hammer to push a perspective. Hammers are used to be a hammer. They're tools within the bylaws. People want to use the bylaws as the hammer, and it's not. But I can't think of another punishment more effective than forcing someone to a bylaws committee to rewrite bylaws. That is torture. But I'm always a fan, especially on advisory councils, I'm always a fan of no more than one page. You don't even need a page. Here's exactly what we're asking of advisory council members. We want this, we want this, we want this. If you can't do it in 3 bullet points, it's probably too much.
So I had a question on, maybe if you look at it like the spectrum of a full board versus an advisory board, do you see in your experience that if you ask too much of an advisory board, you're really asking them to be a board, but so you say the people on your board, what are you willing to pay, right? Are you willing to give them a vote? Are you willing to have their voice be heard
Right.
in that situation? Do you see things like that happen as an issue, or is that really not a problem?
Yeah. I think I want to actually approach that.
Okay.
I'm going to go a roundabout way to approach that. So I'm on an advisory board of 2 with a business that approached me, and a friend of mine gets into that networking thing. A friend of mine said, hey, you need to meet a common friend. He introduced us, and she said, I really want to, I've got this small business. We're doing about $3 million a year in revenue, been around for 13 years, we've got such an opportunity to take this to the next level. I don't know how to do that. I need some help doing that. I want to create a board. And my advice to her was don't. Because when I asked her some of these questions about why do you want to create a board, well, I'm looking for connections. I want connections and I want ideas around how to take this to the next level. I said, well, I'm willing to help you because I think it's a really good product and a good idea. And I've got a friend that I'll bring into this. And between the 2 of us, I think we can get you what you need. And if we can't, then you can always expand from there. And it's worked out really well. Up until now, we have been just that. I mean, we have meetings and we get paid in cookies. Well, it's a cookie company.
Meet other board members?
Exactly. Well, it should be get paid in cookies and a gym membership so that they balance each other out. But between the 2 of us, we've been able to help her, I think, really structure and come up. We've got probably 5 different business expansion ideas to take this pretty easily, I think, from a $3 million business to pretty quickly a $12 million business and beyond. And do some kind of proof of model on a couple of different ideas we've got. But we're kind of at the stage now of basically she's buying our time. And she's starting to get aware of, oh, wait a minute, I'm asking a lot from you guys. Let's kind of formalize this. And as a small business owner, you really, she operates on pretty tight margins. Basically what you have is equity. So we're in the process of talking about how that's going to work, what she wants from us, and we're asking her.
Does she have employees?
Yeah, she's got, thinking about the bakery, it's probably 15 or 20 employees. Does a lot of cookies every year, and has, if you've ever been to Metropolitan Market and seen The Cookie. The Cookie.
That's the cookie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody gets happy about cookies.
Yeah.
It's like pie.
Yeah. So we're working on some concepts with The Cookie.
Brilliant.
Yeah, she's done extremely well. And she's scrappy. She's one of the scrappiest women I've met in terms of, she built this thing from the ground up. She's a go-getter. She's a hard worker. She works for Alaska Airlines on the weekends in their lounge up at SeaTac so she can get benefits. And this is 13 years later. So she is a scrappy entrepreneur, and we're having fun. So, but it's a matter of, she's essentially buying our time. We're cheap right now, just cookies. but they're great. I know. See? See? But you need to think about that. If she wasn't getting the value from us, then it has to be mutually beneficial. So.
And we'll move on beyond cookies. I mean, the idea being you guys are doing this, cookies only last so long.
Yeah, well, we're looking at what we can do with that. We got some pretty big ideas around.
Seems like it could be a really big deal.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool and fun.
Yeah.
And she didn't need a big board. She thought she did, but she found. I have a biased opinion on this. She found the right two people, and it gets down to this networking thing. And I tell students always ask me, how do you know so many people? And I always tell them it's just because I'm old. And I've stayed in one place. I've worked in this community. I grew up here. I was born here. And I stayed here, and I worked here, and I worked in development, and I know a lot of people. And I brought on a friend of mine who also knows a lot of people and brings a different skill set, very different perspective, but between the two of us, we get her what she needs. So it works out well in that case. Another case might be completely different.
Do you guys cross over much, or is it just like two separate, like fully packed entities that kind of match versus?
Yeah, we bring
guys-
very different
things.
networks and different skills. He owns another, I wouldn't call it small, another business in town here, and is also an investment banker so he brings a different network and a different kind of perspective to our discussions, and I bring my network and my perspective.
Did you like cookies too?
Yeah. Although he just, yeah. No, yeah, it's a great product. It's a great product, and you will never meet a more passionate person about their product. Remember what was it Kevin said last week about having to have passion for your product? It was one of the reasons I really wanted to do this, and actually I left the meeting with her and immediately got on my phone and called my friend and said, we got to do this together, because she was so passionate about her product.
Awesome. If you need to make a field trip to New York to see a similar product there, it's completely different taste, but there's a place in Upper West Side.
He's there today.
Really? At that cookie
Right.
place?
She went there and sat there for 3 days and watched them.
Okay, so it's the same thing. Okay, because
Those are the, I mean, that, when I came to Metropolitan Market, that's the first thing I was like, I can live here in the Northwest because of now.
Yeah.
because of New York.
Yeah, no, she went to New York, sat in that bakery for 3 days and watched their process and came back and developed the recipe and the process for making these.
I didn't realize it came there. Well, the line starts forming around the block at that place, like 2 hours before it opens.
Yeah.
It's like, they're amazing.
Right. So, and I think the lesson in that is she got the board that she needed.
Yeah.
She got exactly what she needed through networking. It was a common friend of ours who has nothing to do with, he works for the port. But I knew him, she knew him. He thought, hey, you two need to meet and put us together. So that worked out well. And that's one of the things when I talk with people who are trying to get businesses going, and because it can be so all-consuming, you start to turn inward and kind of work in your cocoon, because you got stuff to do. You got to get the job done. But what that does is it starts to turn you inward. So I think that's one of the ways that an advisory group or a board or whatever you're going to call it can help you, is as you're turning inward to make this venture float, it can keep you externally connected. It can be your, what do they call that in biology? The organism that creates the connection between, there's a few different.
Interstitial.
No, it's
Symbiotic? You
yeah, it's a symbiotic. It's a
Yes.
symbiotic thing, but it is true. That's a good one. I was thinking intermediate host.
Right. Yes. Yeah. But it's that, and that's actually the way I look at it in my head is it's necessary that you turn inward to get it done. But what that does is it cuts you off from all kinds of different stakeholder groups. Yeah.
You get from this perspective, you got to have somebody
Yeah.
else who goes like, because
Yeah.
inward we can go.
Right.
Somebody's going, no,
Right. And those organisms who live on the boundary between you and your constituencies are your ears and your eyes and your mouth, both inward and outward. And that is the most beneficial role for a board, for any board, is to live on that periphery and communicate inward and outward. So let's see, the power of diversity, I talked a little bit about that. And you got to bring diverse perspectives to the table. And when I say diversity, I mean diversity in its broadest sense. Different backgrounds, different opinions, different. If you bring together a group of people, it's the thing that happens a lot in the nonprofit sector, is especially with a self-sustaining board, where the board has a governance committee or a nominations committee, and then they nominate their friends, and then they come on, and then they nominate their friends, and it becomes this kind of, and you aren't bringing in other voices, other opinions, other perspectives. It doesn't happen all the time, but I've seen it happen where it becomes this exclusive little group, and you get people who think alike.
So what in regards to diversity, I know it's important here at the university, but in corporate America, you look at a board, a bank board, old white guys.
Oh, yeah.
With money.
It's rich old white guys.
Yeah, and my question is it important to have female and people of color on it, just even though you're a small little company? What does that bring?
I always like to look at individuals as individuals. If you're a board of rich old white guys and you bring a rich old black guy on, are you really bringing a different group?
Right, yeah.
If it's someone who's still kind of within that group, are they really bringing a different perspective? I think it always depends on the person, who the person is, and what skill sets they bring, and can they be a voice within the boardroom. I've seen people that bring diversity to a board, and the diversity sits at the end of the table and is quiet. And that's not diversity. That's tokenism.
On that subject, so imagine that a diversity is a value, and that you bring someone onto the board with the intent of bringing diversity. So now the context is you are the diversity for the board.
Right.
So have you noticed, and I like what you said about seeing a person as a person and what value do they bring as a person. But how do you, is that poisonous to bring someone on as the diversity?
If they're the right person, I mean, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
If it's a board of all, even if it's a board of all white women, I've seen some that are all mostly white women by their bylaws. Not white, but bylaws said they could only have women because it was an agency that served women. And my question for them was, so does the male voice, is that a voice that you don't want to hear in your meetings? I had this discussion with another group that serves the LGBT community, and they had a feeling that to feel safe, people had to be somehow affiliated with that community. And I always said, well, whose opinion are you trying to change?
Right.
Who in advocating for people within your community, whose opinion are you trying to affect? Don't you want that voice represented at the table? Don't you want a diverse voice bringing that perspective? So if it's someone who's going to represent that voice and the voice is silent, it's not a voice. It has to be someone who can come to the table and bring that perspective. There's organizations in town here who, by their bylaws, most of this is because of this one in particular I'm thinking of is because of federal law. 51% of their board members have to be clients. That can be a big challenge. When you're serving people in disadvantaged communities, how do they get to board meetings? Do they understand really what governance is? They're taking on a fiduciary responsibility, and it creates a problem. It's a big problem. I had an argument with a student once in my class who was on the board of a mental health nonprofit in the community, and we were talking about diversity, and she had a very strong opinion that someone who is mentally ill had to be on the board of an organization that serves the mentally ill. And I told her, well, okay, I've got two observations. I said, one, make no assumptions. What does mental illness look like?
Which one are you pick?
Yeah. In general, the people that I've run into who have mental illnesses don't wear a badge.
I can do 8.
Yeah.
Don't.
Right.
You're talking about when people come in and getting the like ideas, it kind of becomes inbreeding. And when you're basically looking for somebody to come from the outside that would help promote adaptation.
Yeah.
It keeps the
Yeah.
pretty strong.
I think it's a good practice especially for a bigger board, to always do I used to keep a kind of a grid of who were the people on our board and what were the skill sets that we were looking to have represented. And, this person might bring, they're a lawyer, so they bring, the law. I always asked them what their skills were, and then I also evaluated it too, whether or not I thought they were someone who kind of spoke up and brought an alternative opinion to the table. I was always looking for, because I was there for 15 years. The first, 7 years of that, I wasn't the director, and then the last 8 I was. During those 7 years, I attended every board meeting. They meet monthly. Attended every board meeting, and I never saw a no vote on anything. I never saw another opinion voiced. And I thought, okay, that's going to change. And actually, one of the first things I did, one of the first meetings when I was the executive director, is I went to a board member and I asked them to, I knew it was an issue that they didn't agree with, and we had a culture of agreement, and I asked them to vote no. Please vote no. And it shook things up. So that's the power of diversity. Is you want diverse voices at the table. You want them to. And you want to build a culture that makes it okay for them to speak. So
I have a question before I leave.
Yeah.
Earlier you said something, it's important to have a conflict of interest on your board. Can you qualify that a little bit? Like, what is a conflict of interest that you have to be acceptable with and not acceptable with?
So fiduciary conflict of interest is kind of a range. A fiduciary conflict of interest means that you are somehow going to benefit from a vote. Either you or someone you're related to, or so we're a board and we're voting on our insurance carrier for this organization that we've carried, and my dad owns one of the insurance companies that is in the mix for what we've done. It's okay that my dad owns that insurance company. What I have to do is say, hey, my dad owns one of these, and I'm going to recuse myself from this conversation. And you step back. You can still participate in it. If Tom says, hey, we've got this question, Joe probably knows because his dad owns that agency. You can ask me and I can answer it, but I can't vote. I have to back away from that vote. So that's that conflict. That's a kind of conflict of interest. My interest is you have a fiduciary responsibility to put the organization's needs first. And if there's some possible conflict, even if it's usually it's not the conflict usually, it's the appearance of conflict that can get people in trouble. That, oh, well, you knew so-and-so and they're gonna benefit from this. So if you've got a board that's acting as that organism on the outside of your, and they're all really well connected and networked in the community, somewhere you're gonna run into some of those, they're gonna cross wires somewhere in there. So if you've got none, it might mean that your board, it might mean, it doesn't necessarily mean, but it might mean that your board members aren't well enough connected in the community. So that's what I was referring to. I hope that helps. Yeah.
It does.
Good.
Nice to meet you, take care.
What was your second point, Joe, of your observation with the student?
Oh, don't assume anything in terms of mental illness. And also don't assume that you've got to be wearing the shoes to represent that perspective. So if we're the board of that mental health nonprofit, and I'm not mentally ill, this is theoretical, and I'm not mentally ill, but I've got a child who is, or I've had a parent who was, or I'm an advocate for, yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean I can't bring that perspective because I'm not in the shoes. People come to a table because, for many different reasons, and that was the other point, that don't assume that voice can't be brought to the table except through a client.
An advocate might actually understand what they're trying to get, rather than bring someone in who may be challenged by it, but someone who understands what that person does day to day.
Right.
That'd be,
Right. Yep. So I think I covered everything on my list, all my questions. Were there questions that you had though that I didn't get to?
Well, the evaluation and stuff, there's a number of resources out there.
Yes.
You mentioned the one, and I get it in the email, it's the little tiny vignettes about board and some development and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think you touched on some really good points. Because when I was first put on the USO, I didn't know anything about nonprofit boards. But here recently, you talk about 501c3. I thought 3 was just something other, but there's about 20 some odd 501c categories, which all have.
Is the USO 3?
Yeah.
Or are they 6?
It's
okay.
3.
Okay.
But this organization I'm working for right now is a 6.
Is a 6, yeah. Which is a membership-based.
And Gold Star
Organization,
wise
yeah.
is something like, I think there are 6 also.
Yeah.
Because that's a lobbying group. And when you donate to these people, they say, oh, we're a 501, but
it's not deductible. You can still donate to them, it's just not deductible.
Yeah, you can give them money. And then how they spend their money. Because as he was talking about certain organizations, there's certain veterans ones where to meet that category, they have to have some number, like 95% of the membership has to be veterans.
Right.
But just take a look at, just Google that and see all these, the 20 some odd categories that do stuff. A homeowners association is a 501c.
6, usually. Not 3.
No, not a 3. That's a 501c.
3 is the one that is deductible, and it is more of
It's either
a.
5 or 6. I always get, there's
Some,
some.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's.
Yeah.
So there's I'm a member of Military Order of World Wars, and I think they're a 19, which is a tax deductible.
Right. Yeah, that code is a long one.
Okay, so I'm in the process of building a board now, so I have many questions. So I think you covered a lot of really cool things.
Good job.
Maybe the
Sure.
board?
All right, see you next week.
See, George, good to see you.
All right. So,
See you. Take
so my question is, okay, now I understand, I want to have this core board that's got the fiduciary duties and really, have the insurance to cover them. And then now I want to have a larger board that's which maybe is advisory, that's going to do my outreach.
Okay.
And we talked a little bit about organizing them in specific tasks. So, I might want to have a board that's focused on diversity, because that's important for my company, and I want to, train students to be future scientists, and so I want them to be the board first. But I also want another board that's really building connections with the biotech companies in the area. So So, and I call them already boards. So they're kind of like technical board or members or your advisory
Right.
committees.
Right.
But I'm organizing them in different bins. So I wanted you to comment on that. It's like, first of all, I understand now I have to really explain those tasks. And there may be some people that sit on all of them, right?
Right.
So I need to be really clear on those tasks. How do I remove somebody from a board? Or like, how much weight do I need
Have
to
fun.
pull? Yeah, and what if I, like, what's the kind of, I mean, there must be, among board members, you kind of know when you're not doing really what you're supposed to be doing,
Right.
probably.
Yeah.
And so how do you get people off the board or encourage them to be productive?
Well, I would lay it out in your expectations. What's the expectation? 60% attendance at meetings, or whatever your expectation is, let people know. Then when they're down around 20%, you get something to say, hey, we got this, this doesn't seem to be working out. Would you like to step off of this? Usually what you do is you have a time of the year that you bring people on. You can bring people on all year, but kind of like the official.
Okay.
And that's when you kind of, usually people who aren't, it's just not clicking for, they know it. There's no big mystery. So you use that as the opportunity to either have that conversation or they will offer up, hey, I need to back away. What I always like to do is somehow, and this is a challenge that a lot of boards go through, how do you keep those people as friends? And I always say, again, that's a communications problem, is how are you going to communicate with them? How do you want them to be friends? Why do you want them to be friends? Is there some way that you're going to, at that annual time, bring everyone together and do some kind of gathering that, kind of a progress report? I used to be affiliated with you 5 years ago, but hey, you're having this coffee and I'm going to come and hear what's going on. I'm interested. I'm still interested. I'm not on the board anymore, but I'm still interested. So that's an important piece. The other thing is just for your sanity, doing them as individual entities is kind of really difficult. Every one of them is going to requires time. Time managing them. I think the way I would structure it is one entity with committees.
Okay.
That they're all tied into one thing. And you can call it whatever, advisory council, or, and within the advisory council, there's these 4 pieces of it, and you're on this piece. And maybe this group you're gonna work with this group different, but in terms of coming together, they're all
in one place.
Yeah.
Bring them all together.
Because there's some synergy in that too.
Yep. No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good stuff.